In a typical construction contract, the documents of a construction contract, you find some terms used. A lot of times people find it difficult to understand what these terms mean and how they are used or applied or enforced in a typical construction project. On this video, I would want to explain some of these terms so that it is clear if you're a contractor, you're a student, or you're a client, you will be able to understand what these terms mean when you see them and how to deal with them within a construction contract. The first is fluctuations. Fluctuations. Fluctuations refer to changes in prices or of prices of materials or labor. So when you have changes in prices, prices fluctuate, they go up and down. So by the time the contract was signed, maybe the price of cement was say 5,000. And as you start the project and move on, cement skyrockets to 10, 15, 7,000 or for details. That difference in price is what we call fluctuations. And if you had cost of labor at a particular rate as at the time you started the job, and within the time of that contract, changes occur because of some government policies or whatever it is in the cost or price of cost of labor, then that constitutes fluctuations. How is fluctuation dealt with within a contract? Fluctuations as extra costs to a contractor are paid by the client. Now, it is unlike some other kinds of changes we're going to discuss, like variation or additional works. A contractor does not have profit markup paid to him in addition or on top of fluctuation. So if, for instance, at the time the contract was signed, the contractor had stated his base price, his rate, his basic rate as, say for cement, say it is 5,000. Maybe for block, he has put 500 naira as his basic rate of these items. By the time the contract resumes, within the term of that contract, there are changes that cement goes up to, let's say for instance, to 10,000, and block goes to maybe 1,000 naira. So what happens is that within the time of the contract, within the duration of the contract, the contractor will need to keep a record of how many bags of cement he uses within that contract, that he bought at a price different from that which was his basic price. So maybe he had done the job 2 months into the time of the contract, and the thing now changes, as at that time maybe the entire quantity of cement to be used in that project was estimated at, let's say, 5,000 bags or maybe 20,000 bags. Let's say 20,000 bags, and he had bought about 5,000 at 5,000 naira, which was his basic rate when he signed the contract. And now, if the contract is a fluctuable contract, in other words, if it's a contract that allows for fluctuations, now after 2 months, cement rises to let's say 7,000. Now, within the time cement cost 7,000, he bought an additional 5,000 bags of cement. Now, after 1 month, that cement cost 7,000, cement now moves to 10,000 naira, and cement stays at 10,000 till that project ends. This contractor will have to calculate the amount of bags of cement he bought at 5,000, and the amount he bought at 10,000, and the amount he bought at 7,000. For the ones he bought at 7,000, he will be refunded that. So if he bought 5,000 bags at 7,000, which is 2,000 naira over addition to his basic rate, he will be paid 2,000 naira, the extra cost, times the number of bags he bought, which is 5,000 bags, that he will be paid that. And for the rest of the contract that he bought cement for 10,000, he will now be paid extra 5,000 naira for the total number of bags he bought at 10,000 naira. The same applies to labor. If he engages 20 laborers who were supposed to be paid 5,000 and they are now paid 6 or 7, as the case may be, the number of laborers and the times they worked and the amount, the extra amount are multiplied, and he's paid that amount, and all of that is put together to form the additional payment to be made. no profit markup on this. It is just that extra money that he spends. That is exactly what he is going to be paid. That is fluctuations. The next is determination. Now, this term appears in some forms of contract. If you look at maybe the Federal Ministry of Work forms of contract, if you look at the standard form of building contracts in Nigeria, the term determination is used in place of termination of contract. Whereas if you look at such contracts like the FIDIC, the term termination is used. But again, the term determination appears in a form of contract like the FIDIC. Now, what does determination mean in forms of contract like the standard form of building contract in Nigeria or the Federal Ministry of Work forms of contract? What does the term determination mean? Determination in these forms of contracts mean the ending of the job of a contractor on a project. So there is a reason for the client to want to end the job of the contractor, or a reason for a contractor to want to end his job on a project. Now, if a job is determined under these forms of contract, the meaning is that the conditions of that contract subsist. The only thing that comes to an end is the job of the contractor. So the job of the contractor is what is determined. That's what comes to an end. So the client can afford to go employ somebody else under the same conditions that the former contractor was employed, and the person will finish the job. So if it was agreed that that project will be completed, maybe say with 10 million naira, if the job of the first contractor is determined, another contractor will be employed to finish the job under the 10 million naira budget for the job. If within the execution of this final part of the job that this new contractor spends more than 10 million naira in the job, then the conditions of contract says that the former contractor will have to pay back if he was the one who defaulted and the client determined the job. But if it was the client who defaulted and the contractor determined his own job under the contract, then it is explained that the extra money, if extra money is incurred for doing that job by the new contractor, if it is the client that defaulted and the contractor determined the job, then the old contractor will not have to pay any additional money if they exceed the 10 million naira budget for that job. So, but the explanation is that for determination, it is ending of the job of a contractor on a project. It does not have to, the conditions surrounding the job will not have to end. That takes us to the next term, termination, which is like determination. But in termination, as used in some other kind of contract, termination refers to bringing to an end both the job of the contractor and the conditions of that contract itself. So if any other person will be engaged to finish that job, the person will have to do the job under different conditions. The project cost will change, and certain other conditions, maybe the time frame for job, everything will have to change because it's a different thing altogether. In determination, we said it is just the job of the contractor that will end. The conditions of that contract remain the same. But for termination, everything, the job of the contractor as well as the contract itself, will come to an end. Remember, I had said earlier that in forms of contract like FIDIC, determination is a different word. Determination in a form of contract like the FIDIC, it refers to the decision that the consultant makes when there is a dispute between the contractor and the client. He comes in between as an adjudicator, kind of, to bring peace, to create peace between both of them. The decision he takes and he's put down on paper, that decision is called a determination. That is for a form of contract like FIDIC. But for the term determination and termination, which look alike, determination as used in forms of contract like the Federal Ministry of Work forms of contract or the standard form of building contract in Nigeria, means ending the job of a contractor, while termination as used in other forms of contract refer to bringing to an end both the job of the contractor and the contract itself. The next term I would like to define or explain is what we call defect liability period, DPL. What does this mean? Usually, a contract has a duration. Now, within the duration of the contract, a contractor is expected to deliver his job. If he delivers that job, there is always time that is kept to check whether there is any fault or mistake in what he has done. So if the man finishes his job and the job comes to an end, we call it practical completion. A certificate is given to the man to say he has practically completed the job. Immediately after that man has completed that project, the defects liability period begins. It is a period that is left to check if there are defects that will arise on this job that the man has done. Within this time frame that the job is being checked out, if there is any fault that arises and such a fault is traced to poor quality material or poor workmanship, the contractor is obliged to go back to site to make good such defect. If such a thing does not happen within this time, if the defects liability period comes to an end, the contractor goes away. So if within the defects liability period, there is a default that arises and it is traced to poor usage, because as at this time, after practical completion, it is expected that the client will take over his building or project. So within the time the client takes over his projects and begins to use it, if they refuse such a project or such any items or things installed on the project, the contractor will bear no obligations. We had a project, and in that project, these two things played out. We had installed some ACs on the project when we finished. When the client took over, they discovered that some of the ACs had issues, factory default issues. We had to come, remove these ACs, replace them for the client. In that matter, it was our own installations that had issues. And so within the defects liability period, we had to change it. But on the same project, we had installed sanitary fittings, and somebody who belongs to the client organization went to use it, climbed on top of a WC, and somehow the thing broke. When they called us, we explained to them that it is not within our own cost to replace such. So you understand what defects liability period means. For building project, it is usually 6 months. For engineering project, is about a year or sometimes more than 1 year, depending on what the parties agree on. The next term I would like to explain is variations. What is a variation, or what does variation mean within a contract? Variation refers to change in scope within the scope of a contract. Change in scope within the scope of a contract. What does this mean? So in other words, if a client comes up with some changes, or if any, for whatever, if it for site reasons, any changes occur when a project is going on, such a change happens to be within the scope of the approved contract itself. That change is called a variation. And let me give you an instance. Let's say, for instance, it was agreed that maybe say ceramic tiles will be used on a particular project. And the client, for taste reasons, decides to change from ceramics, maybe to use porcelain tiles or marble or granite on the same project. Remember, already the contract in its scope contains tiling work. But what has changed now is the type of tile that will be used on the floor. So in this instance, there is a change in scope. But this change in scope is within the approved original contract. There is a change in the scope of tiling, but tiling is still within the contract itself that originally was signed. So this type of change that is within the contract is called a variation. There is such, again, we call additional works. That is the next term I want to explain. Additional works, they are also change in scope of a job, but now outside the scope of the original contract. Let's say, for instance, a wall is to be built in a contract, and it was agreed on initially that what it will be is a block wall. But as the site situations arise, it became needful that a block wall wouldn't work there anymore. That what is now going to work is a concrete wall. There was no concrete wall in the original contract, But now there is need to replace a block wall, which is what was in the original contract, with a concrete wall. This kind of change is an additional work because it is a change that is outside the original scope agreed on. Or that you agreed that a building was going to be, let's say, 3-bedroom flat, and now the client now decides that he wants to make it 4 or 5-bedroom flats, or that it was usual before it was a bungalow, now the client wants to make it a story building, 2-story building. All of these are now beyond the scope of the contract that was originally agreed on. Such a change order is called an additional work. The next term I would want to explain is contingency sum. Contingency sum. This is an amount set aside by a client in a construction contract to take care of uncertainties that were not envisaged when the contract itself was signed. Construction is an activity laden with uncertainties, and so it is imperative that provisions are made to cater for such uncertainties when they happen. One of those provisions is contingency sum. Contingency sums are meant to take care of uncertainties that were not envisaged when a contract was signed. Now, these uncertainties should be taken care of with this fund that is provided. Contingency sums are not sums belonging to a contractor on a job. They are monies belonging to client, but he keeps it down to say, should anything happen, take money out of this. If a contingency sum is completely spent on a project, that sum is added to the original contract sum to form the revised contract sum at the end of the day when the contract is finished. If a contingency sum is not exhausted within the time of a contract, whatever amount of it that was spent is now incorporated into the contract sum to form a new contract sum at the end of the day. The amount of it not spent goes back to the client. It is not a money it's not amount belonging to the contractor. If none of contingency sum is utilized at all within a contract, then the whole money goes back to the client as his own money at the end of the day. So contingency sum refers to an amount of money that is set aside by the client to cater for uncertainties which were not envisaged when the job was initiated. The next term I would want to explain is what we call retention. Retention sum. This sum is an amount that is set aside like a security for a client during the course of a project. This retention sum, the explanation comes in line with defects liability period that we had explained earlier. Now, when a contractor is doing a job, a client keeps some part of his money, usually 5%, but it does not exceed 10% and cannot be below 3% on any contract. Such an amount is taken from every money due the contractor. So each time the contractor is due for a payment, 5%, 10%, 3%, as the case may be, is deducted from the amount due him at every particular time of payment, and it is kept. That money taken is called retention. That 5% or so that is removed is kept, taken off from all payments of the contractor. As a matter of fact, it sums up to 5% of the entire contract sum. Now, this sum is kept as a security just in case the client discovers that some work has not been properly done and the contractor fails to do this job. The client will take some part of that contingency, the retention fund, to solve this problem or make good such defect or bad work that has been done by a contractor that he has refused to do. And it is taken from that money, and whatever is left at the end of the day is paid to the contractor. It is usually during the defects liability period, because when a construction project has attained practical completion, half of that money, we call it a moiety, is paid to a contractor. The half of it, 2.5% or half of it, is kept for during defects liability period. So during defects liability period, if there are defects and the contractor fails to make good such defects, the client uses part of that money that he has kept to solve the problem. At the end of defects liability period, the remaining amount is the second moiety is paid to the contractor of whatever is left. So if the client does not do such any work out of the retention fund, the entire retention fund is given back to the contractor because it's his money. But if any part of it has been used to do some work, then an account will be given of it, and what is left is given back to the contractor. The next item to explain is what we call prime cost sum. Remember, we had said earlier that construction is laden with uncertainties, and provisions are made to cater for these uncertainties at every point in time. Prime cost sums refer to amounts of money set aside under a contract that are meant for items of work that were envisaged at the time of inception. But such items of work in scope are not clear, and the person to do them, because such items of work are kept for specialist subcontractors. Such works are for specialist subcontractors, and the amount set aside for them is called prime cost sum. So whenever that item of work becomes clearer, the scope becomes clearer, or a subcontractor is gotten for it, the subcontractor is meant to break down his work, and the cost is given. An approval is given from the prime cost sums to cater for such. So prime cost sums are sums set aside for jobs, works that are known that they will be done from the beginning, but maybe the scope of such a contract, of such a job, or the person to do it, such a specialist subcontractor to do it, is not known or wasn't seen as at the time of inception of the contract. Such an amount of money is set aside for such item of work. The last explanation or term that I would want to explain today is provisional sums. Provisional sums are sums, just like prime cost sums, set aside for works that were originally envisaged from the inception of the contract, but the scope of this work is not known. The difference between a prime cost sum and a provisional sum is that the works encapsulated for to be done under the provisional sum are sums that works that are being carried out by the general contractor. The general contractor carries out works that provisional sums are set aside for, whereas specialist subcontractors are the ones who do the works that prime cost sums are set aside. So both provisional sums and prime cost sums are sums set aside for items of work that it's known that it will be done, but the scope of such a work, of item of work, is not known. Let me give you an instance of such items of work that provisional items could be set out for. Let's say, for instance, water that will be used for work. Water will be used. Everybody knows from the beginning that water will be used, but nobody knows the quantity of water that will be used. We know that we'll use electricity for work, but we don't know what quantity of electricity we'll use. We know that there will be scaffolding, but we don't know the extent of scaffolding we will need. Vehicle will be used, but we do not know what quantity of petrol we'll buy within the term of the contract. We do not know what level of maintenance that will be done in the vehicle within the time of the contract. We do not know how such things will play out at the end of the day. The list continues. So these are things that really help us to see, indeed, what things to take care of within a construction contract. When we have uncertainties laden or written all over the face of a construction contract. I'll be here next time to explain to you some other terms that we'll find in a construction contract.